Publius Aelius Hadrianus was born on the 24th of January, 76 in Italica, a Roman settlement near modern Seville in Spain. The town had been founded by Italic settlers during the Second Punic War under the leadership of Scipio Africanus. Hadrian's family, a branch of the Aelia gens, originated from the town of Hadria in central Italy, from which the family name Hadrianus was derived. While one ancient biographer claimed that Hadrian was born in Rome, most scholars agree that his birthplace was Italica. His father, Publius Aelius Hadrianus Afer, was a Roman senator of praetorian rank who had also been born and raised in Italica. His mother, Domitia Paulina, came from a prominent senatorial family in Gades, the modern city of Cadiz. Hadrian had one sibling, an older sister named Aelia Domitia Paulina. His early years were marked by the care of his wet nurse, a slave named Germana, who was likely of Germanic descent. Hadrian remained deeply attached to her throughout his life, eventually granting her freedom, and her tombstone, found at his villa in Tivoli, shows that she lived longer than he did. Among his extended family, Hadrian's most significant relative was his father's cousin, Marcus Ulpius Trajan, who would later become emperor. Both men shared Italic ancestry and belonged to Rome's elite senatorial class, though, as later historian Aurelius Victor noted, they were regarded as adveni, or outsiders, because of their provincial origins. Some modern scholars refer to them collectively as part of an Ulpio-Aelian dynasty. Hadrian's parents died when he was only 10 years old, leaving him and his sister under the guardianship of Trajan and Publius Acilius Attianus, who would later serve as praetorian prefect. Even as a child, Hadrian showed an active and curious mind. He was fond of outdoor pursuits, especially hunting, a passion that continued throughout his life. At the age of 14, Trajan summoned him to Rome to continue his education in the traditional studies expected of a young Roman nobleman: rhetoric, philosophy, and military training. His deep admiration for Greek culture and literature soon became apparent, earning him the affectionate nickname Graeculus, or Little Greek, a term that reflected both teasing and admiration for his Hellenic tastes. Hadrian's political and military career began in Rome, where his first official position was as a member of the Decemviri Stolitibus Judicandus, one of several minor magistracies that formed the initial stage of the cursus honorum, the traditional ladder of Roman public offices leading to senatorial rank. After this, he served as a military tribune, first with the 2nd Legion Adiutrix in 95, then with the 5th Legion Macedonica. During his second posting as tribune, Emperor Nerva, already old and in poor health, adopted Trajan as his heir. Hadrian was one of the messengers sent to deliver this news to Trajan. He was later transferred to the 22nd Legion Primigenia, where he completed a 3rd term as tribune, an unusually high number that reflected his growing reputation and ambition. Most men from senatorial families served only 1 or 2 such appointments before advancing to higher office. When Nerva died in 98, Hadrian quickly went to meet Trajan, reportedly arriving before the official envoy sent by his brother-in-law and political rival, Lucius Julius Ursus Servianus. By 101, Hadrian was back in Rome and had been elected quaestor, serving as Quaestor Imperatoris Traiani, a liaison between the emperor and the Senate. In this capacity, he delivered Trajan's speeches and may even have written them himself, taking the role once held by Trajan's close friend and advisor, Licinius Sura. Hadrian later became Abi Actus Senatus, responsible for recording the Senate's proceedings. During Trajan's first Dacian War, Hadrian accompanied the emperor as part of his personal staff. though he soon returned to Rome to take up the position of tribune of the plebs in 105. Afterward, he was likely elected praetor. Hadrian again joined Trajan during the Second Dacian War, serving first as legate of the First Legion Minervia and later as governor of Lower Pannonia in 107, charged with defending the empire's borders against the Sarmatians. Between 107 and 108, he successfully repelled an invasion by the Iazyges tribe into Roman territories in Banat and Oltenia. The terms of the resulting peace remain unclear, but it appears that Rome retained Oltenia in exchange for some concessions, possibly involving tribute payments, while the Iazyges took control of Banat. Now in his mid-30s, Hadrian traveled to Greece, where his admiration for Hellenic culture deepened. The Athenians granted him citizenship and appointed him Archon Eponymos, the city's highest annual magistrate, in 112. In recognition of his achievements, a statue was erected in his honor in the Theater of Dionysus, with an inscription listing the offices he had held. Little is known of his activities until Trajan's Parthian campaign several years later, when Hadrian rejoined the imperial entourage as a senior legate. When the governor of Syria was dispatched to address renewed unrest in Dacia, Hadrian assumed command in Syria with full authority over the eastern legions. As Trajan's health began to fail, he left for Rome, leaving Hadrian in charge of the eastern army. The emperor made it only as far as Selinus in Cilicia, where he died on the 8th of August 117. His death marked the end of one of Rome's most celebrated reigns and set the stage for Hadrian's own rise to power. Hadrian's marriage and connection to Trajan's family played a crucial role in his future. Around the time he became quaestor, in 100 or 101, he married Vibia Sabina, Trajan's grandniece and his own second cousin once removed. Trajan himself was reportedly unenthusiastic about the match, and the marriage would later prove deeply unhappy. The union was likely arranged by Trajan's wife, Pompeia Plotina, an intelligent and cultured woman who shared Hadrian's admiration for Greek culture and his vision of Rome as a unified empire bound by Hellenic ideals. For Plotina and her family, Hadrian's advancement promised to preserve their influence after Trajan's death. Hadrian also benefited from the support of his mother-in-law, Salonia Matidia, daughter of Trajan's beloved sister Ulpia Marciana. When Marciana died in 112, Trajan deified her and granted Matidia the title of Augusta, further elevating Hadrian's connections within the imperial family. Hadrian's relationship with Trajan, however, was complicated. He sought to influence the emperor, at times through his association with Trajan's younger companions, which may have led to tension between them. Around the time of his marriage, some disagreement appears to have arisen, and although Hadrian continued to enjoy imperial favor, he never received the highest distinctions that might have marked him as Trajan's clear successor. He attained the position of suffect consul in 108, a respectable but not exceptional achievement for someone of his standing. Trajan could have advanced Hadrian more rapidly by granting him patrician status, but chose not to. Despite these setbacks, Hadrian's loyalty to Trajan remained evident. Ancient sources mention that Trajan presented him with a diamond ring originally given to the emperor by Nerva, a symbolic gesture interpreted by many as a sign of intended succession. Yet Trajan seemed cautious in his endorsement, promoting Hadrian steadily, but without explicit declaration. By the end of Trajan's life, Hadrian was firmly established as a senior and capable figure within the imperial circle, but whether he had been officially designated as heir was still uncertain. Failure to designate an heir in Rome often risked civil war, as rival claimants competed for power. Yet naming one too early could be seen as an abdication, undermining imperial authority. When Trajan lay dying in Cilicia, attended by his wife Plotina and the prefect Attianus, he could have legally adopted Hadrian simply by expressing his will before witnesses. However, when the official adoption document was produced, it bore Plotina's signature, not Trajan's. This irregularity, combined with the fact that Hadrian was still stationed in Syria, far from the emperor's bedside, as Roman law required both parties to be present, raised doubts about the legitimacy of his succession. Ancient historians were divided. Cassius Dio dismissed the adoption as fraudulent, while others accepted it as genuine. Nonetheless, Hadrian's authority was soon confirmed through coinage portraying him as Trajan's designated heir, symbolically labeled Caesar. After Trajan's death in 117, Hadrian's path to power became irreversible. According to the Historia Augusta, he announced his accession to the Senate through a letter, justifying his swift elevation by claiming that the troops had insisted on it to prevent instability. The Senate ratified his rule, and the legions received their customary bonuses. Hadrian held ceremonies celebrating what he described as his divine election by the gods, now including the recently deified Trajan. Hadrian remained in the east for some time, dealing first with a Jewish revolt in Judea that had begun under Trajan. He dismissed the province's powerful governor, Lucius Quietus, a Moorish general, stripping him of his command. Soon after, Hadrian faced unrest along the Danube frontier, which he personally moved to quell. Meanwhile, in Rome, Attianus, Hadrian's former guardian and current Praetorian prefect, claimed to have uncovered a conspiracy involving Quietus and three prominent senators, Lucius Publilius Celsus, Aulus Cornelius Palma, and Gaius Avidius Nigrinus. The four men were executed without trial, reportedly on Attianus's orders. Hadrian distanced himself from the killings, rewarded Attianus with a consulship and senatorial status, then quietly retired him from power within a few years. He assured the Senate that in future it would retain full authority to judge its own members. The motives behind the executions remain uncertain. These senators were among Trajan's most senior advisors, experienced, influential men who might have opposed Hadrian's policies or challenged his legitimacy. Each of them had both the rank and political weight to make a credible claim to the throne. It is also possible that they represented the faction supporting Trajan's expansionist vision, which Hadrian was determined to abandon in favor of consolidation and peace. Regardless of the truth, the event cast a lasting shadow over Hadrian's reign. Despite his attempts at reconciliation, his relationship with the Senate never fully recovered. In 125, Hadrian appointed his close ally, Quintus Marcius Turbo, as Praetorian prefect. Turbo, a trusted administrator and judge, was given broad authority to oversee legal and military affairs. To restore senatorial confidence, Hadrian decreed that members of the equestrian order could no longer preside over cases involving senators, reaffirming the Senate's judicial independence. Yet his efforts failed to erase the bitterness left by the earlier purges, and distrust persisted for the rest of his rule. Some accounts suggest that Hadrian relied on a discreet network of imperial informers, known as frumentarii, to monitor the activities of high-ranking officials and even personal associates. Hadrian would go on to spend more than half of his reign outside Italy, an unprecedented commitment for a Roman emperor. Unlike his predecessors, who mostly left Rome to wage wars, Hadrian traveled across the empire to personally inspect provinces, oversee administration, and promote his vision of a unified, cosmopolitan empire. He aimed to integrate provincial peoples into a shared Roman identity rooted in Greek culture and civic values. Rather than imposing Roman colonies, he encouraged the growth of local municipal governments that preserved regional customs within a framework of Roman law. This ideal of unity was reflected in his later coinage, which depicted him symbolically raising personifications of the provinces, an image of paternal care and inclusion. Writers such as Aelius Aristides would later praise Hadrian for extending a protective hand over his subjects, portraying him as a benefactor who sought harmony rather than conquest. However, traditional Roman elites saw his approach as dangerously indulgent, even effeminate. They likened his constant traveling to Nero's earlier tours of Greece, which had scandalized conservatives by emphasizing art and spectacle over duty. Hadrian's enthusiasm for Hellenic culture and philosophy earned him the reputation of being too Greek for a Roman emperor. Yet this very cosmopolitanism was central to his vision of empire, an empire not of domination, but of cultural fusion, where Roman order and Greek intellect coexisted under his guidance. His reign marked a deliberate shift from expansion to preservation, a policy that sought to fortify borders and bind the vast, diverse territories of Rome into a single, civilized whole. Before Hadrian's arrival in Britannia, the province had endured a serious rebellion between 118 and 119. Inscriptions from the period mention a British expedition that required major troop movements, including a detachment of around 3,000 soldiers. Contemporary sources speak of heavy Roman losses. To restore order, Emperor Hadrian sent Quintus Pompeius Falco to Britain in 119, and by 122, he personally visited the island. During this visit, he initiated the construction of a massive fortification, later known as Hadrian's Wall, intended to separate the Romans from the northern tribes. Whether the wall was a response to an immediate military threat or a broader strategic measure remains uncertain. It was likely built to solidify Rome's frontier, reduce military costs, and regulate cross-border movement and trade, rather than to repel a single invasion. A shrine was erected in York to honor Britannia as the divine spirit of the province, and new coins were issued with her image. By the end of 122, Hadrian left Britain, never seeing the completed wall that would forever bear his name. After Britain, Hadrian traveled through southern Gaul. At Nemosus, modern Nimes, he may have overseen the construction of a basilica dedicated to his patroness Plotina, who had recently died and had been deified at his request. Around the same period, he dismissed his secretary, the historian Suetonius, and his praetorian prefect, Gaius Septicius Clarus, reportedly for showing undue familiarity toward the empress, a convenient pretext for their removal. Hadrian spent the winter of 122 to 123 in Spain, staying at Tarraco, where he restored the Grand Temple of Augustus, reinforcing his image as a restorer of the old order. In 123, Hadrian crossed to North Africa, leading a short campaign in Mauritania to suppress local revolts. His stay was brief, as news soon arrived that Parthia was preparing for war, prompting him to head east. On his journey, he stopped in Cyrene, where he financed the military training of young men from prominent families, continuing his pattern of civic generosity. Earlier in his reign, he had already funded the rebuilding of Cyrene's public buildings, which had been destroyed during the Jewish uprising in Trajan's time. This type of personal patronage, combining cultural restoration, military preparedness, and civic pride, was characteristic of Hadrian's reign. Upon reaching the Euphrates frontier, Hadrian negotiated directly with the Parthian king Osroes I, reaffirming peace between the two empires. After inspecting Roman defenses, he traveled along the Black Sea coast, and likely spent the winter in Nicomedia, which had recently suffered from a devastating earthquake. He financed its reconstruction, earning acclamations as the province's restorer. It may have been in nearby Claudiopolis that Hadrian first encountered Antinous, the young Bithynian, who would later become his closest companion. Though the details of their meeting remain obscure, artistic depictions suggest that Antinous was about 20 at his death in 130, implying that he would have been an adolescent during this period. Whether he joined Hadrian as a servant or gradually became a favored companion is unknown, but his influence on the emperor's emotional life and legacy would be profound. Hadrian continued through Anatolia, establishing new cities and promoting the imperial cult. In Mysia, he founded Hadrian Eutherae to commemorate a successful boar hunt, and in Cyzicus he completed the long unfinished Temple of Zeus, which was adorned with a colossal statue of himself. Major cities such as Pergamon, Smyrna, Ephesus, and Sardis were elevated as centers of Roman religious and administrative life, reflecting Hadrian's policy of cultural integration and regional empowerment. By autumn 124, Hadrian arrived in Greece, where he took part in the sacred Eleusinian mysteries. Deeply attached to Athens, which had earlier granted him citizenship and an honorary archonship, he became actively involved in Athenian civic affairs. At the request of its citizens, he reformed their constitution and added a new tribal division named after himself. While he avoided meddling in minor disputes, such as disagreements between olive oil producers and city officials, he generously provided imperial subsidies for the city's grain supply and public games. He established permanent endowments to fund festivals and competitions when local benefactors were unable to do so, encouraging wealthy Greeks to focus their patronage on lasting civic works such as aqueducts and fountains. Under his sponsorship, Athens gained new water systems, while cities like Argos saw ancient shortages remedied with grand aqueducts and reservoirs. During his travels across the Peloponnese, Hadrian commissioned temples at Epidaurus and statues of himself in heroic form. His affection for Antinous may already have influenced his generosity toward certain cities, especially Mantinea, which he favored for its mythic ties to Bithynia, Antinous' homeland. He also restored several ancient sanctuaries, including those at Abe, Megara, and Argos. One of his most lasting political gestures was persuading the aristocrats Eurycles Herculanus of Sparta and Herodes Atticus, the elder of Athens, to join the Roman Senate. Their appointment symbolized the integration of traditional Greek elites into the highest levels of imperial governance, bridging the ancient divide between Sparta and Athens. In March 125, Hadrian presided over the Athenian festival of Dionysia, wearing Greek dress. He also undertook the completion of the long-delayed temple of Olympian Zeus, a project left unfinished for more than 5 centuries. His involvement ensured that the colossal temple would finally be completed, becoming one of the crowning monuments of his Hellenic vision. Returning to Italy, Hadrian briefly stopped in Sicily, where coins celebrated him as the island's restorer. In Rome, he admired the rebuilt Pantheon and the completion of his vast villa at Tibur. In 127, he embarked on an inspection tour of Italy, funding infrastructure projects such as the drainage of Lake Fucino and the restoration of ancient shrines. However, his administrative decision to divide Italy into 4 regions under imperial legates, effectively treating it like a set of provinces, deeply offended the Senate. The reform did not last long after his reign, but it revealed Hadrian's determination to impose efficiency over tradition. Around this time, Hadrian's health began to decline, though he continued his travels. In 128, he set out again, this time to North Africa, where his arrival was heralded by a fortunate rainfall that ended a drought. He inspected the legions, gave an address to the troops, and continued his program of civic renewal. By the summer, he had returned to Italy, only to depart once more for an extended journey through Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt. In 128, Hadrian participated again in the Eleusinian Mysteries, reaffirming his connection to Greek religion. He then developed the idea of a Pan-Hellenic League, a federation uniting the Greek cities under Roman protection but celebrating their shared cultural heritage. After setting this project in motion, he traveled to Ephesus and from there to Egypt. Upon arriving before the Egyptian New Year in 130, he restored the tomb of Pompey the Great at Pelusium, symbolically honoring the man credited with extending Roman power in the East. During his stay, Hadrian and Antinous hunted lions in the Libyan desert, a moment later immortalized in poetry. But tragedy struck soon afterward. While sailing on the Nile, Antinous drowned under mysterious circumstances. Theories range from accident to ritual sacrifice. Devastated, Hadrian founded a new city, Antinopolis, on the site of his death and encouraged his deification across the empire. Shrines and temples to Antinous appeared throughout the Roman world, blending grief, devotion, and politics into a new cult that would outlive both its subject and its emperor. Continuing his travels, Hadrian visited Thebes and the Colossi of Memnon, where inscriptions commemorate his visit. He returned north through the Fayum, leaving behind a trail of cities, monuments, and dedications that reflected not only his imperial power, but also his deep fascination with art, architecture, and human emotion, a legacy that would define his reign as one of Rome's most complex and culturally transformative eras.